From miniature toys to life-size models, from monumental races to action-packed films, cars have always held center stage in American culture.
The new 1953 Chevrolet.
Traveling east, traveling west, wherever you go, Chevy service is best. Go Speed Racer, go Speed Racer, go!
And though we commonly acknowledge Detroit as the automobile capital of America, it was Chicago that sparked and exemplified America's affinity towards the auto industry. America's first automobile race, one of America's largest auto shows, Ford Motor Company's large assembly line, the famous Route 66, and grand exhibitions at the 1933 World's Fair made the city of big shoulders a birthplace of America's car culture. In 1895, Chicago hosted America's first automobile race, known as the Chicago Times-Herald Race. Out of the 89 who entered the contest, only 6 racers from across the country were in attendance on Thanksgiving Day due to 6 inches of snow that covered the ground, conditions not suitable for open carriages and narrow tires. Of these were Frank Duryea driving a gasoline-powered car, 3 Benz automobiles, 1 driven by Oscar Mueller, 1 by Macy & Company, and 1 by De Laverne Refrigeration, and 2 electric cars, all daring to set new records for the car industry. The New York Times on Macy's car wrote, "It is hoped that the journey to Chicago will be made in 10 days, or an average distance of about 100 miles a day. If this is accomplished successfully, it will constitute the longest single regular trip ever made with a horseless carriage." At a blistering 7.5 miles per hour, Duryea crossed the finish line of the 54-mile course in just 10 hours and 23 minutes. Had it not been for the weather, his car could have attained a maximum speed in the excess of 20 miles an hour, reported the Chicago Tribune. The St. Paul Daily Globe wrote that the performance of the winning vehicle was the most remarkable in the history of motor vehicle contests, and that the race was followed with great interest by hundreds of manufacturers from all parts of the United States. It was Chicago that introduced the nation to the motor cars that were powered by gasoline, and the days of a horse and buggy were now numbered. The city did not simply take part in the American frenzy over cars, it essentially ignited it. Six years after the Times-Herald race, Chicago held its first annual auto show. Originally held in the Coliseum, there were 65 models exhibited at the show, and room for a small test track for demonstrations of the horseless carriages. In 1908, the Chicago Tribune, having admitted that New York is credited for the first automobile show, argued that Chicago's is the national show and the largest in the country. And in 1915, the Tribune read, "The National Automobile Show has done a great deal to sustain and develop the industry." Some of the most popular brands and models of cars were revealed at these events, including the first Chevrolet Corvette in 1952, a jewel of the auto industry at the time. Within 2 years after the 1901 inaugural show, Chicago had become an automobile mecca, and by 1950 it was dubbed the biggest show in the country. Chicago then continued to fuel America's love affair with the automobile, drawing thousands to the city each year so that they might catch a glimpse of the latest in automotive technology, making it the hub of the auto industry. With its continuing popularity, the Chicago Auto Show has been held more times than any other auto exhibition in the continent. In 1913, Henry Ford introduced the assembly line at Ford Motor Company, reducing the time it took to manufacture cars. He opened an assembly line in Chicago in 1924, which became one of the biggest assembly lines in the country. Because cars were now being mass-produced, the automobile became accessible for the masses, not just a luxurious commodity. An article in the 1930 edition of the Chicago Tribune reports that the Chicago plant produces 110,000 cars a year. Because of this mass production, it is more convenient to adopt a drive-away system rather than transport their cars on freight railways. While freight trains were still effective in transporting goods, a drive-away system is, quote, more economical than rail freight. Consumers had the opportunity to purchase a vehicle and drive it home directly from the plant. Thus, this made the Chicago plant the country's largest showroom. Only one city could satisfy America's appetite for the automobile: Chicago. years after the assembly line in Chicago opened, the plan for a highway to connect the east to the west was finalized. Route 66 would stretch from Chicago to the Santa Monica Pier in California. Had it not been for the entrepreneur Cyrus Avery from Oklahoma, Route 66 may not have existed at all. Recognizing that American transportation was changing rapidly at the wheels of the automobile, Avery said to the U.S. Highway Association that the Federal Aid Act of 1916 was a fine move in the right direction, but it is a move all too slow for this motorized age of undreamed-of developments. Avery sent a telegram to Thomas McDonald in Washington, D.C. saying, "We are inclined to agree to this change. We prefer 66 to 62, and thus Route 66 was born." Chicago was the perfect place for the highway to begin. It had all the amenities to give travelers a good start on their journey. Route 66 carried approximately 210,000 people west during the Great Depression, looking for opportunity. After World War II, it embodied freedom, prosperity, and ingenuity, both for travelers and the mom-and-pop businesses.
Get your kicks on Route 66.
Nat King Cole was inspired to write the famous Route 66 song after traveling the highway with his wife. The famous show Route 66 was based off of the road, telling the story of two young men as they traveled the United States in a Chevrolet Corvette. The car industry went hand in hand with the American ideals of Route 66, and just like the hype over automobiles started in Chicago, so did the dreams of iconic road trips. But the industry did not stop there. At the 1933 World's Fair, big brand auto dealers were adamant about having their own magnificent exhibition at the Century of Progress. The Chicago Tribune reported in 1933 that more than 185,000 persons was recorded on opening day, completely surpassing the crowd on the opening day in 1893. Because of its success, major car companies thought it was important to put on a grand display, making Chicago another venue for the automobile movement in America. The big three automobile companies, General Motors, Ford Motor Company, and Chrysler Motors, each had their own pavilion with their own auto exhibits and different showcases to appeal to the grandeur of their models, such as racetracks, assembly lines, and much, much more. The Art Deco architecture of each pavilion gave a futuristic and scientific undertone to the exhibitions, especially the Grand Chrysler Motors building, with bright lights that illuminated the exterior of the building at night. In a photograph from 1933, the Chrysler Building is shown in all of its splendor, emanating the futuristic theme of the fair. Much like it did in 1893, Chicago had outdone itself, attracting more than 22 million visitors within 6 months. The city still continued to create a drive for the auto industry through its illustrious displays at the Chicago World's Fair in 1933. Chicago ignited America's love affair with the automobile by hosting the first American car race. It fueled the passion with the Grand Auto Show and large assembly plant. It gave direction as the starting point for the highway of American dreams, and it took that dream into the future with the Century of Progress. Though it was not home to many of the big brand auto companies, that never stopped the city from making revolutionary contributions to the car industry. As a major American city, Chicago helped to vitalize and progress the automobile movement, to spread it all around the country, and to draw people into the industry itself. It made the automobile a product of the common man, but at the same time an art form, and something essential to the American dream, a dream of going faster and farther into the future.
Vacation, a wonderful American institution of going new places and doing new things.
Okay, give me the keys. I'll go get it.
I hate to tell you this, but that's where all the house keys are, in my purse.
Oh.
The open road at last, ready to go places.
You are lost.
The real expert is the one who takes the time to discover
Chicago, a great empire set in the heart of America.